The sun over Velmora was a brutal, burning thing, casting long shadows across the jagged plains. Beneath its unflinching gaze, a child was born who should never have lived. Jari entered the world in silence, not with the proud shriek of a Velmoran newborn, but with a quiet, shuddering breath. The midwives recoiled immediately, whispering curses under their breath, their spindly forms drawing back as though she were some grotesque beast. She was too large, too wide of shoulder and thick of limb. Her skin, a darker shade than was acceptable, seemed to shimmer oddly under the sterile lights of the birthing halls. She was an affront to Velmoran ideals of beauty, and from her first heartbeat she was marked. Custom dictated she should have been discarded. It had happened before. Those born too weak, too malformed, too strange, were quietly taken into the red sands and left for the wastelands to claim. It was a mercy, they said. But something stayed their hands that day, perhaps fear, perhaps a terrible curiosity. Instead of death, they chose exile. Jari was locked away in a remote cave system, too young to understand the prison that would shape her life. Her parents spoke her name once, and never again. She grew without laughter. She learned the shape of the stars before she learned the sound of another's voice. Her caretakers, tasked with providing her meager sustenance, never looked her in the eye. As she grew larger, stronger, and stranger, their fear deepened. Stories began to circulate among the Velmoran children, tales of the beast-blooded girl who lurked beyond the edges of civilization, watching, waiting. Mothers warned disobedient children that if they wandered too far at night, she would snatch them away. Loneliness became the air Jari breathed. She watched from the high cliffs as festivals lit up the valley, vibrant and dazzling. She pressed her enormous hands to the cold stone and listened to the faint strains of music that would never be for her. When winter winds howled through her caves, she imagined the warmth of another's embrace, something she had never known, something she feared she never would. In the solitude of endless nights, she tried to mimic the songs she heard carried on the wind, her voice echoing back to her, monstrous and wrong in the empty chambers. As she entered her adult years, she surpassed every Velmoran in size and strength, her body rippling with a terrifying, primeval power. Her claws, once soft as a child's, grew into thick, gleaming talons. Her muscles hardened like twisted cables of iron. The Velmorans, already fearful, now spoke of her in hushed, desperate tones. Their oldest legends warned of beast-bloods born once in 1,000 years, creatures of ruin who would bring devastation if they ever found a mate, binding their strength with another's will to wreak havoc on the world. They watched the shadows more carefully now. Hunters were stationed along the borders of civilization, not to protect from foreign invaders, but from one of their own. Whispers traveled fast, sightings of a towering figure moving at the edge of vision, eyes gleaming in the dark, breathing mist in the cold night air. Mothers locked their doors and lit protective fires. The elders debated in secret councils whether the time had come to end the abomination they had once spared. But Jari had no desire for vengeance. She did not hate the Velmorans, she barely understood them. They were a dream she had never entered, a warmth she had never tasted. She craved only the simple things she had been denied, the sound of another's voice speaking her name with kindness, the touch of a hand that did not flinch away. In her mind she stitched together fantasies from the few books that had been left to rot in the caves with her, ancient tales of heroes and friendships, of communities that welcomed the outcast and cherished the different. Yet as years turned to decades, even dreams began to wither. She grew wary of her own hope, knowing it to be poison. She became a ghost, surviving on scavenged food and melted snow, hiding in ruined temples where statues of long-forgotten gods crumbled to dust. At night, she sat by dying fires and whispered apologies to the wind for simply existing. The horror of her life was not in the monstrousness others saw, but in the simple, relentless erosion of her spirit. Every day that passed without another voice, another smile, another soul brave enough to meet her gaze, was another small death. She mourned herself in pieces, until only a raw, aching core remained, feral, desperate, but still, impossibly, hopeful. It was hope that kept her close when the new beings arrived. The humans. She watched their silver crafts tear the sky, their strange laughter filling the valleys with a music unlike anything she had ever heard. They walked unafraid through the red sands, where Velmarins dared not tread. They built camps that glowed warm against the cold night, filled with voices that sang and argued and comforted. She watched them for days, unseen, her great form pressed into rocky crevices, hardly daring to breathe. She had seen many Velmarins come and go across the years, but none had ever set foot in the red sands willingly. These newcomers, these humans, had no such fear. They treated the land as if it belonged to them, and when they spoke of the future, it was with excitement, not dread. Something stirred in Jari then, something old, something she had not felt in so long she nearly didn't recognize it. A longing, fierce and aching. A question, fragile and burning, would they see her, truly see her, if she dared step into their light? Would they be different? But fear held her frozen. The Velmarins had already poisoned the humans with their warnings. She heard the words carried on the winds: beast, monster, danger. They would fear her too. They would drive her away, or worse. So she remained hidden, a forgotten titan in a world that never wanted her. She lingered at the edge of their firelight, a specter of sorrow and strength, wishing with every ragged breath for a miracle that might never come. The night the humans saw her, everything changed. Jari had been perched in the upper cliffs, nearly invisible among the dark stone, when the humans set their fires too close to the forbidden lands. She tensed, muscles coiled tight. If the Velmarins saw them, they would be warned, driven back, or worse. She crouched lower, willing herself into the shadows, but the humans seemed oblivious. They laughed and argued over their strange cooking pots, tossing bright sparks into the sky. It was reckless, beautiful, terrifying. One of them, a tall male wrapped in loose survival gear, wandered farther from the fire than the others. He carried a scanner, its faint beeping breaking the soft silence of the dunes. Jari should have retreated deeper into the caves. She knew the pattern of discovery well, first fear, then shouting, then weapons raised. Always the same. Yet she stayed, heart pounding. Some part of her longed for even the briefest encounter, even if it ended in horror. The scanner led him closer and closer until he stumbled upon an old shrine half swallowed by sand. Curious, he knelt, brushing dust from the eroded stones. His fingers lingered on carvings that once told stories of heroes now lost to time. Jari shifted slightly to get a better view, and a small stone dislodged beneath her weight. It tumbled down the slope, clattering loudly. The human jerked upright, scanning the darkness with sharp eyes. He didn't call for help. He didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he stood still, listening, his breath fogging in the cold night air. Jari froze, her massive body hidden by the cliff's natural curves, every instinct screaming at her to flee. But when he spoke, his voice was low, almost inviting. "You're not alone out there, are you?" he said softly, in a language she barely understood but somehow felt. There was no accusation in his tone, no fear, only quiet certainty. It was the first time in her memory that another living soul had spoken words not dipped in malice or terror toward her. Her claws dug into the rock, leaving deep gouges, as she fought the overwhelming urge to step forward. Minutes passed. The human waited. He sat down on a nearby boulder, deliberately lowering himself, making himself smaller. In Velmoran culture, such an act would be seen as foolish, a surrender of dominance. Here, it was a gift. Jari didn't understand the full meaning, but something deep inside her recognized the gesture. Slowly, painfully, she shifted her weight, moving closer to the light, letting just enough of her form catch the faint glow that he might see her. His eyes widened, but not in terror. Ah, perhaps curiosity. Even respect. She watched his throat bob as he swallowed hard, yet he did not run. He spoke again, slower this time. "You're beautiful." The words hit her like a blow. She staggered back a step, confusion and terror warring inside her chest. Beautiful? She, who had been called monster, beast, curse. It had to be a trick. No one could look at her hulking, twisted form and use that word in earnest. But the human remained seated, unmoving, offering her no threat. He reached into his pack slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a small ration bar, setting it on the ground between them before retreating a few steps. A peace offering. Jari's mind screamed at her to run. Every scar across her soul warned her of betrayal, of cruelty hiding behind kind faces. But her body, starved for connection far more than food, betrayed her. She inched forward, wary, every step a monumental act of will. She snatched the offering and retreated immediately, cradling it in her hands as though it were some priceless artifact. He smiled. Not the smirk of cruelty she knew too well from Velmoran's stories, but something different, gentle, tired, real. "My name's Grant," he said, tapping his chest. "Grant." She stared at him, trembling, heart hammering so loud she thought the mountains might hear. She had no name that mattered. The one given to her at birth had been spoken only once, and then discarded. But something in her could not let this moment pass untouched. In a voice thick with disuse, rasping like dry leaves, she spoke her own name for the first time in years. "Jari!" He grinned wider, and the sight of it made her ache deep inside. "Jari!" he repeated carefully, almost reverently. Something inside her cracked, a dam holding back years of loneliness and pain, and tears she hadn't known she could still produce welled up, blurring her vision. She turned and fled into the darkness before he could see her weep. For days she lingered nearby, too afraid to approach again, too desperate to stay away. She watched from the shadows as Grant spoke about her to the others. He didn't call her monster or beast. He told them he had seen someone incredible, someone worth meeting. Some were skeptical, others curious. No one immediately armed themselves for a hunt. That alone was enough to keep Jari tethered to hope, thin and fragile as it was. Still, Velmoran fear ran deep. Scouts sent rumors back to the villages. The humans consorted with the beast-blooded. Whispers of war grew louder. Plans were made in secret, plots woven under the twin moons. Jari heard it all from the wind, and terror gripped her anew. She had dared believe, dared hope, and now her existence threatened not only herself but the humans who had shown her a glimpse of kindness. The Velmorans would not come to negotiate. They would come to destroy. Jari understood then that her very life was a threat to anyone who dared see her as more than a monster. That was the horror of it, not just the cruelty she had endured, but the certainty that even kindness carried a price she could not allow others to pay. She made a choice. Before the Velmorans could strike, before the humans could be dragged into a war they didn't understand, she would vanish. It was better this way. Safer. For everyone. Her final night near the human camp was spent watching them from afar, memorizing the sound of their laughter, the way their fires warmed the dark, the easy way they touched and spoke and lived. A life she would never touch, not really. She whispered Grant's name once, a promise carved in the silent sands, then turned away, vanishing into the wilderness she had been born to haunt. Behind her, the fires burned on, and the stars blinked in sorrow. Grant didn't know why her absence cut so deeply. It had only been a handful of encounters, half glimpsed across firelight and sand, but something about her had rooted into his bones. He wandered the dunes longer than he should have, calling softly into the night, hoping to see even a flicker of those silver eyes reflecting back at him. But Jari was gone, leaving only footprints that the wind quickly swallowed. His team thought him obsessed, and maybe he was. Every ancient world had its ghosts, they said, and he had merely seen one. But he knew better. She was real, painfully real, and her loss settled in his chest like a stone. It wasn't long before the Velmorans came. They arrived without warning, an embassy under the banner of peace, but the steel glinting beneath their cloaks betrayed them. Grant watched them closely, feeling the undercurrent of hatred just barely contained behind formal words and hollow smiles. The Velmorans demanded to know what the humans were doing here, what technologies they sought to steal, what forbidden creatures they planned to unleash. Every question dripped with accusation. Grant realized then that Jari wasn't just an outcast among her kind, she was a weapon, a symbol of everything the Velmorans feared and despised. Her existence threatened their tight grip on power and tradition. He couldn't forget the way she had looked at him, like someone seeing a sunrise after a lifetime underground. No being deserved to live hunted simply for being born wrong in the eyes of cowards. Grant pushed back against the Velmoran delegation, refusing to give them anything. His commanders were furious. Their orders were clear: avoid conflict, secure resources, maintain neutrality. But Grant knew neutrality was a lie when it came at the cost of innocent lives. Rumors swirled faster than the desert storms. Velmoran hunters prowled the outskirts of camp, whispering of purification rites and cleansing flames. Grant tried to warn the others, but protocol chained his hands. He wasn't supposed to interfere with native species politics. He wasn't supposed to get involved. Yet he found himself leaving supplies outside the camp's perimeter: food, water, medical kits, hoping against hope that somewhere, hidden among the canyons and cliffs, Jari might find them. Nights grew colder. The Velmoran's patience thinned. One evening, under the pretense of a diplomatic dinner, they struck. Explosions tore through the human encampment, shattering the peace, igniting the sands with fire and blood. Panic erupted. Grant fought through the chaos, dragging wounded comrades to safety, searching desperately through the smoke for any sign of Jari. But she wasn't there. She had stayed away, as he had feared, believing she brought only death. The humans responded as humans always did: fast, brutal, efficient. Defensive lines formed. Return fire howled across the battlefield. But the Velmorans had unleashed something far worse than soldiers. Dark shapes moved through the flames, not entirely Velmoran, not entirely beast. Twisted creatures bred for war, born of the same forbidden lines Jari had been cast from. They tore through defenses with savage glee, immune to fear, immune to mercy. Grant realized the horror too late. The Velmorans hadn't come to eradicate humans. They had come to use the chaos to unleash their failed experiments, to clean their bloodlines by fire. The humans were merely convenient casualties. If Jari had been captured, if she had been forced into that monstrous army. A cold rage settled into Grant's bones. He would not allow her story to end buried under lies and slaughter. Rallying a handful of survivors, he carved a bloody path toward the enemy lines, driven not by orders but by something far more primal. Hope. Duty. A promise made in the stillness of a desert night. Hours blurred into a haze of gunfire and screams. Grant's world narrowed to one goal: find her. Save her. Somewhere deep in the enemy camp, chained and drugged, Jari lay broken but alive. She had fought when they captured her, fought with the strength of a dozen men, but even she had limits. Shackled, starved, beaten, she had been paraded before the Velmoran generals as a symbol of their triumph. A trophy of their fear. Grant found her just before dawn, locked in a cage barely big enough to hold her massive frame. Her eyes were dull, her spirit flickering on the edge of extinguishment. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. For a moment, she recoiled in terror, expecting another blow, another humiliation. But then he spoke her name. Softly. Firmly. Like an anchor thrown into a storm-tossed sea. Jari. Recognition flared in her eyes, followed by a sob that ripped from her chest with a force that staggered him. Grant didn't hesitate. He tore open the cage with explosives and sheer determination, hauling her free even as alarms blared through the camp. Together they fled, half carrying, half dragging each other through the burning wreckage. Every step was a battle. The Velmorans threw everything they had at them: soldiers, beasts, fire, but something greater than survival drove them now. They ran for freedom, for dignity, for the simple, stubborn belief that they deserved to exist without chains. When they finally stumbled over the last ridge, collapsing into the arms of the surviving human forces, the battle behind them raged on, but something had already shifted. The humans saw her, not as a monster, not as a weapon, but as one of them. A survivor. A fighter. A soul worth saving. Grant never let go of her hand, not even as medics swarmed around them. And for the first time in her life, Jari let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't too broken, too monstrous, too dangerous to be loved. She was free. And freedom, she realized, wasn't something given. It was something fought for, something claimed with blood and stubbornness, and the unbreakable bond of those who refused to see monsters where there were only miracles. Recovery was not immediate. Even after the Velmarins were pushed back and the battlefield turned cold and still, the true battle began inside Jari. Her wounds were more than physical. Each scar on her body whispered of betrayal she had endured since birth, of voices that had told her she would never be enough, never be wanted. Grant stayed by her side, refusing to let those old ghosts win. In the sterile halls of the human field hospital, where the air smelled of antiseptic and burned hopes, he became her anchor. He read to her from old Earth stories, tales of heroes who were broken but fought on anyway, legends of those who rose when everyone else expected them to fall. At first, she barely responded. Trauma had built walls thicker than any fortress. But humans were persistent creatures. They knew how to chip away at mountains one stubborn blow at a time. Soldiers who had once feared her now brought small gifts, a carved figurine, a length of cloth embroidered with bright colors, a crude drawing from a child who had seen her from afar and decided she looked like a goddess rather than a monster. Jari had never known this kind of kindness, raw and imperfect but fiercely real. Slowly, painfully, she allowed herself to hope. Grant advocated for her relentlessly. When officials back on Earth balked at the idea of integrating a non-human into their ranks, he stood before them and told them bluntly that humanity wasn't defined by bloodlines or species, but by heart. He told them Jari had bled beside their soldiers, fought for ideals she had never even been offered, risked everything for people she barely knew. He reminded them that humanity's greatest strength had always been its stubborn refusal to leave anyone behind. There were battles fought in boardrooms and back channels more vicious than any waged on sand and steel. But Grant's words struck a chord. Public opinion shifted. The broadcast showing Jari standing silently among human soldiers, towering and battered but proud, ignited something deep within the hearts of people who had themselves once been outsiders, misfits, and dreamers. She became a symbol not of otherness, but of unity. An unlikely beacon in a universe that often seemed too cold and cruel to allow miracles. The first time she was allowed to stand on Earth's soil was a moment few ever forgot. She stepped from the landing craft onto fields of green unlike anything her desert world had ever known. Children ran toward her with wide eyes and open arms, their laughter ringing out across the hills. She knelt in the grass, overwhelmed, and wept openly before them all. No one mocked her. No one turned away. They wept with her, honoring the wounds she had carried silently for so long. Integration was not easy. Prejudice still lurked in dark corners. Some whispered that she was a danger, a mistake, a ticking bomb waiting to explode. But Jari met their hatred the way she had met everything in life, with silent endurance and quiet dignity. She trained alongside the human soldiers, learned their customs, their languages, their songs. She wasn't fast by their standards, nor was she particularly skilled with their weapons. But she possessed an indomitable spirit, an ability to take crushing blows and rise again without bitterness or despair. It was that spirit that made her legendary. Grant and Jari served together on countless missions. Worlds turned under their boots, stars wheeled overhead, and each time they faced death, they faced it together. They became something more than comrades, more than friends. Without ever speaking the words, they had chosen each other. An unbreakable bond, forged not in comfort but in fire. News of their deeds spread through the colonies and beyond. Stories of the giantess and the soldier who had refused to let fear dictate the future. Songs were written about them in a dozen languages. In a galaxy teetering on the edge of endless wars, their story became a whisper of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. But heroes do not live without sacrifice. On a mission deep within contested space, when an entire settlement of human colonists was threatened with annihilation, it was Jari who volunteered to stay behind. The enemy forces were too many, the evacuation too slow. Someone had to hold the line. She looked at Grant one last time, her silver eyes soft and full of unspoken words, and he understood. She wasn't sacrificing herself because she believed she was lesser. She wasn't giving up because she thought she didn't belong. She was fighting because she finally knew her worth, because she had been loved enough to believe she could be a shield rather than a shame. Grant tried to argue, but she silenced him with a gentle touch, her massive hand resting against his heart. A promise passed between them without words. Not goodbye. Never goodbye. Only love. Only gratitude. Jari held the enemy at bay long enough for every last colonist to escape. Reports said she fought like a force of nature, unyielding, unstoppable, beautiful even in destruction. When reinforcements arrived hours later, they found only wreckage and silence where the battlefield had been. No body. No certainty. Only a legend. Grant never stopped looking for her. He carried her memory like a banner, a beacon in the darkest corners of the galaxy. Wherever he went, he told her story, not of the creature too big to belong, but of the heart too vast to be caged. Monuments were raised in her honor, not because she had died, but because she had taught an entire people what it truly meant to belong. To fight. To hope. Some nights, on distant worlds, soldiers say they see her, a towering figure standing watch beneath alien skies, silent and strong. They say she smiles and then vanishes into the mist. Grant believes those stories. In his heart, he knows she's still out there, somewhere among the stars she once dreamed of touching. And he knows that every time humanity chooses compassion over fear, every time they build instead of destroy, they honor her. The outcast who became their champion. The forsaken who became their greatest pride. Years passed, but the memory of Jari never faded. On Earth and across the colonies, she became a part of human folklore, a living testament to the power of choice and the endurance of spirit. Statues of her towered in plazas and parks, not as a symbol of alien might, but as a monument to what could be achieved when someone believed in another, even when the universe had not. Her image, once scorned and feared, now inspired courage in the hearts of those who felt too different, too broken, too alone to ever matter. Grant, older now, weathered by time and countless wars, carried her story wherever he went. He spoke not of her strength or her ferocity, but of her kindness, her patience, and her ability to endure the cruelty of a universe that had abandoned her from the start. It was that quiet, unbreakable spirit that defined her in his heart. In his final years, he worked to ensure her name would never be erased or misrepresented. He wanted future generations to know the truth, that humanity was better because Jari had chosen to stand with them when she had every reason not to. On the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Velmora Prime, a ceremony was held on Earth, attended by veterans, civilians, and leaders from every corner of human space. The keynote address was delivered by the granddaughter of one of the colonists Jari had saved during her final stand. She spoke through tears about how her family owed their lives to a being that humanity had once deemed too strange, too monstrous, too alien to be loved. She spoke of how Jari had shown them all that worth was not measured in appearances or traditions, but in the choices made when it mattered most. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence under a vast, open sky. Above, the stars glittered like distant memories, each one a reminder of the endless possibilities that awaited those brave enough to believe in something more. Grant stood at the edge of the crowd, feeling the weight of memory settle on his shoulders. He looked up and whispered a simple thank you into the night. He knew she heard him, somewhere out there among the stars. Back in the military academies, Jari's story became required reading. Not as a tale of tactics or military brilliance, but as a study in resilience, in loyalty, and in the power of compassion to change the course of history. Cadets learned that strength alone was never enough. It was the heart behind the strength that truly mattered. They studied how an unwanted outsider had become a rallying cry for unity, how a single choice, to accept rather than reject, had rippled outward, altering the fate of civilizations. Civilians honored her in their own ways. Artists painted murals of her standing shoulder to shoulder with human soldiers. Musicians composed ballads that captured the loneliness she had faced and the triumph she had ultimately achieved. Writers penned novels and poems that explored what it meant to belong, using her life as the purest example. Parents told their children stories of Jari when they faced bullying or exclusion, reminding them that what made them different could one day make them extraordinary. In one of the oldest cities on Earth, a small museum was dedicated entirely to her memory. Inside, visitors could see the simple things she had touched: her battered armor, a preserved fragment of the old ship that had first brought her to human territory, the worn book Grant had read to her during her recovery. At the center of the museum stood a holographic statue of Jari, towering and magnificent, not as a warrior in battle, but kneeling in a field of earth grass, her expression one of awe and quiet gratitude. It was a reminder that the greatest victories were not those won by violence, but those won by love and acceptance. Among all the exhibits, one wall was reserved for messages left by visitors. Digital notes scrawled in dozens of languages, filled with words of thanks, admiration, and longing. Messages from those who had struggled to find a place in a world that often felt cold and unwelcoming. Many wrote of how Jari's story had given them the strength to keep going, to believe in themselves, to find their own place under the stars. In time, her story reached beyond humanity. Other species, some of whom had once viewed humans with suspicion or envy, found hope in her life. Alliances formed where before there had only been distrust. New federations emerged, built not on fear, but on the belief that even the most unlikely alliances could birth something greater than the sum of their parts. Her sacrifice and her triumph became a foundational myth not just for humanity, but for a new era of interstellar cooperation. And still, in the quiet corners of the galaxy, rumors persisted. Stories whispered in spaceports and along the lonely edges of frontier worlds. Tales of a giant figure clad in battle-worn armor, stepping silently through the ruins of forgotten wars, helping those in need before vanishing again into the night. Scientists dismissed the rumors. Officials denied them. But those who had seen her, or believed they had, held the truth in their hearts. Grant passed away peacefully in his sleep, his final thoughts full of stars and the sound of her voice. His last act had been to establish a foundation dedicated to finding and aiding beings like Jari, those cast out by their own kind, who deserved a second chance. The foundation bore her name, ensuring that her legacy of hope and compassion would continue for generations to come. On the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Velmora Prime, a ship bearing the Foundation's symbol, a silver figure standing against a darkened sky, launched on a mission of peace. It carried humans and allies alike, seeking new worlds, new lives, and new chances for those deemed too different to belong. Above them, in the cold vastness of space, a lone figure watched silently. Her armor was old but strong. Her heart, once shattered by cruelty, now beat with pride. She turned away from the ship and walked into the stars, her journey endless, her purpose clear. She had been too big to breed. She had been shunned and cast aside. But she had been chosen. She had been loved. And in the end, she had changed the galaxy. Forever.